Welcome, this is the fourth episode of the series that I'm doing on Taoism. And if you remember in the last episode, we talked about the idea of mutual arising. Basically, that you can't have something without nothing. And in this video, we'll be talking about the idea, the art of Wu Wei, of not forcing. And this is a very interesting idea in Taoism. So I'm very excited to make this video. And by the way, my name is Daniel, and I make videos about stuff that I'm interested in, mainly about philosophy, sharing the lessons that I learned, about the things that I'm reading so that I can help people. I also make videos about climbing, so hope you enjoy the content that I'm making. And I enjoy reading about things like this, about things like Taoism. So I thought, why not share it with you? So hopefully you'll learn something interesting in this video. By the way, congratulations on making it this far into the series. It's already episode 4, and to be honest, I'm not sure if there will be other episodes. This might be the last one. Yeah, well, it all depends on whether or not I found something new to talk about Taoism. So we'll see, but congrats on making it this far. And now if you remember in the last episode, we mentioned that in life everything is changing. That everything is in a constant state of flux. And life is change, and this is the Tao, and to flow with the Tao, to flow with the change of life, not resist it, not fight it, this is Wu Wei. Now before I get into Wu Wei, I want to give you some background to the book, the Tao Te Ching, which is, as we said, one of the basic books of Taoism. And because I think that by understanding where it comes from, we can better understand what Wu Wei is. Now you see, this book is based on a much older book, which is called the Yi-Jing, or however you spell it, the Book of Changes. And basically back then, all the way back then, they used to make decisions and predictions by cracking a turtle's shell by heating it up. And based on the cracks that they saw in that shell, the hexagons that they saw in that shell, they use their intuition to make decisions and predictions based on those shapes. And they simplified this method in that book by using either continuous lines or not continuous lines that have some cuts in them. Although you see, an expert of this Yi-Jing wouldn't have to use turtle shells or something like that. He could see these shapes and hexagons everywhere where he looked. Maybe like a group of flowers or some objects arranged on the table. He could see hexagons everywhere and make decisions based on that intuition that he had. Now you see, the interesting thing is that a psychologist would notice here that this kind of decision making is not so different from their method of the Rorschach's blot, or however you spell that, the Rorschach's blot, where you see the patient's psychological state is diagnosed based on the spontaneous image that he sees in a complicated figure. You have probably seen this kind of images where they just splat some kind of ink on the paper. They mirror it by folding the paper, and then they ask you, what do you see in this image? And you see if the patient could interpret his own projection of that complicated figure, that whatever that ink blob, if he could interpret that, he could gain some useful information about himself, by which he could make predictions about his own behavior in the future. So you see, taking this into consideration, we can't just dismiss the Yi-Jing's method as some kind of superstitious divination, just leaving things up to chance, whatever the turtle says. But you see, the interesting thing is that we make our decisions quite similarly to their way of making decisions, based on some kind of intuition, some kind of gut feeling. Now you see, we feel like we decide rationally because we base our decisions on gathering relevant data on the subject. And we don't waste our time with irrelevant things like the patterns in a leaf or the crackings in a shell. But you see, a practitioner of this Yi-Jing might ask us, what information is really relevant in this decision? How do we know what the relevant information is in this situation? After all, our plans are always, so often, overturned by unforeseen incidents. For example, maybe you're a business owner and you're considering signing a contract with another business owner. And you're taking all sorts of things into account. What's the market doing? What's up with the money? What other guy's business? What his business is like? and all sorts of things you're taking into account. But you see, the guy, after you sign the contract, right after that, the guy might slip on a banana peel, hit his head, and then become completely stupid and unable to function his business. Like, how could you take that into account, you see? You don't know what the relevant information is, because you don't know what might come into play. There are just too many things to take into consideration. So how do you really know what the relevant information in a situation is? And you see, another question that he might ask us is, how do we know if we gathered enough information to make our decision? Because you see, there's just too many variables that come into play when it comes to the future. There's just too many things to take into consideration. And if we were to be very scientific and rigorous with our decision making, it would take forever, long after the time we have to make our decision. So you see, how do we know when we have enough information? Does the information tell us? Does the information itself tell us? Well, you see, quite contrary. When we are making decisions, when we are gathering information, weighing the pros and against the cons, and then you see, either because we are tired of thinking, or because the time has come to act, the time has come to make the decision, thanks to some kind of intuition, we act. I mean, just think about the very simple examples. When you're deciding between two places to go to eat, or you're deciding between tea or coffee, or any kind of simple example. How do you decide? You see, you're thinking, maybe you saw Andrew Huberman's podcast and you're thinking to yourself, man, you see, coffee is, maybe I shouldn't drink this many coffee at this time is not that great, maybe I should wait a little bit. Or you're not sure about tea, but you see, there comes a split-second decision where you just decide, just like that. Okay, it's coffee. Okay, it's tea. Based on some kind of gut feeling, on some kind of intuition that you have. And I might ask you, why did you decide to drink coffee instead of tea? And you might give me some answer, oh, because I heard Andrew Huberman talk about this. But do you really know why you decided to pick coffee over tea? This is such an interesting question. Do you really know why you chose to decide that over that? Now, of course, this scientific approach does work sometimes when we have a bunch of time to make these decisions and when it's not too complex, when it's almost like mechanical, this problem. But you see, for the most part, our decision, even our important decisions, are made based on this intuition that we have, based on this gut feeling, or in other words, this peripheral function or this peripheral vision of our minds that we talked about in the first episode. Basically, for example, when you're driving in a car and you're talking with one of your friends, but at the same time, you're driving that car, you're looking out for the stop sign, for the idiots on the road. Even though you're not conscious of doing that, you're doing that spontaneously, you're doing that automatically. The same way you're breathing automatically. That's the peripheral vision of your mind that we talked about, that we went into detail in the first episode. So you see, the quality of our decision then depends on our ability to feel into a situation. You see, every Yi-Jing expert knows this, that the book itself doesn't really contain any knowledge, but it's a useful tool if you have a good intuition, or as they say, if you're in the Tao. And now you see, if the origins of Taoism come from that book, it's more in the way that they used it, not in what actually contained in that book. You see, making decisions by intuition might show us that this peripheral side of our minds works best when we do not try to interfere with it. When we trust that it works by itself, that it works spontaneously. And this is Wu Wei. When we let our minds work by itself and we do not interfere with it, we do not force it. Because you see, Wu means negative, it's negation, it's not. And Wei means effort, it means interfering, it means clutching, aggression and forcing. So then Wu Wei is the art of not forcing, not acting against the grain of nature, and trusting the way, trusting the course of things. And now you see, this Wu Wei doesn't mean that you don't cut wood, but you cut it along the line that it's most easy to cut. following the path of least resistance. Or it's the same principle that you don't want to force a lock. You don't want to force it open, because if you do that, you will either break the key or break the lock. You got to gently open it by wiggling the key around. And you see, one of the best examples is the art of sailing rather than rowing. You see, rowing, when trying to get to the other side of the river, rowing is a thoughtless approach. It requires strain and hardship. It is going against the current. But you see, sailing uses the power of the wind. It goes with the flow of things. It skillfully gets to the other side. It's a more intelligent approach. And there's a great story about the farmer's son who didn't quite get this. See, one day, the farmer's son came home very late from the fields, and he was late for dinner. And his family asked him, "What were you doing this late out on the field?" And he replied, "I was helping the corn to grow." And you see, the next day, everybody got up in the morning and they found out that all the corn was dead. Because you see, what he has done late in the night before was that for every new shoot of corn, he has pulled it up a little so that it will grow higher. So you see, he tried to force the growth of the corn. He tried to use effort when it wasn't needed. And Lao Tzu says that the world governs itself and it doesn't need our intervention. To quote, "When you arrive at Wu Wei, nothing will be left undone." Now you see, Wu Wei does not mean being passive or being lazy. It's more about being tuned in. It's being locked in this moment, being sensitive and responding to the situation using only the necessary effort needed. And here's a quote to explain. "And so the whole practitioner is able to, from the clarity of his egoless center, observe all relevant forces in a certain situation in their being, in undistorted, so he can respond to them flawlessly." And this is from the video made by Yi-Jing, or however you spell it. I leave a link to all the videos that I've watched in preparation for this video. If you're interested, you can watch those. And you see, this art of Wu Wei can actually improve our outcome. I mean, for example, Judo is all about Wu Wei. It's about using the opponent's force against him. You see, it's about a strike coming at you like this, and you going along with it like this, pulling it and yielding to it. You see, becoming weak against that force, being like water. Water always yields, yet it's the most powerful thing that there is. And there's a great quote in the Lao Tzu that says, it's chapter 76, which says, "The living are soft and yielding, the dead are rigid and stiff. Living plants are flexible and tender, the dead are brittle and dry. Those who are stiff and rigid are the disciples of death, those who are soft and yielding are the disciples of life. The rigid and stiff will be broken, the soft and yielding will overcome." You see, this is just like how in the winter, the branches of a pine tree, I think, are very stiff. And when there's a snowstorm, it will break under its own weight when snow is accumulated on it. But you see, a willow tree, his branches are soft. So when snow falls upon it, it yields to the snow and it doesn't break. Or the same principle when a cat is falling off of a tree, it doesn't stiffen itself and all of its muscles trying to resist the fall, but it relaxes and thus by relaxing, by yielding to it, by becoming weak, it lands with a soft top. Same principle. Bridges. If a bridge is built by being very rigid and stiff, if it has no give, it will break in the first windstorm. But you see, a bridge needs to have a swing to it, and we are just the same. We also need a little bit of give. Otherwise, if we're too stiff and rigid, if we don't have some flexibility, we will also break. But you see, the thing is that in today's culture, we celebrate effort and suffering and hardship. That to achieve our goals, we must impose our will against the world and have it under our control. You see, being busy for the sake of being busy, instead of intelligently making effort. But you see, the interesting thing, The things that we often crave, like happiness or love or respect, charisma, relationship, sincerity, calmness, these cannot be forced. They cannot be pursued with effort or directly. Excessive effort will only make things worse. You see, chasing after happiness and trying to be happy only means that you're lacking it in this moment. And eventually, it is futile. You cannot make happiness an object of your desire. It will only get away from you. The more you try to get it, the more it gets away from you. And it is the same with your love. You can't force yourself to love someone or the other person to love you. And the more you try to do that, the more it gets away from you. And it's the same with charisma or trying to be liked by others. The more you force it, the more you won't get it. But you see, by letting go of it, by not forcing it, you get it by doing that. For example, when you really try to be funny, it almost always fails. You're never funny when you really try to be funny. But it's when you let go, when you're not trying, when you're just chilling with your friend and spontaneously cracking jokes, that's when you're really funny. When you're not trying to be funny. And of course, you see, sometimes hard work and discipline and effort is necessary. But so often in life, situations just solve themselves without our interventions. They solve themselves in the course of time. Just how like the farmer didn't need to pull the crops. He just needed to leave them alone. But of course, when the time comes, when harvesting comes, he pulls up his sleeves and gets to work. Just in the same way, when the time comes, we need to have discipline and we need to make effort. And let me just read you something that I watched in a video. It says that Wu Wei is to act with accordance of the pattern of things as they exist, not imposing an interference that not in accordance. Better to do nothing than to interfere without knowing the system of relationships that exist, based on the feeling of the interdependence of everything from everything else that we talked about in episode 3 when we talked about mutual arising. And you see, there's a great quote in the Ching from Lao Tzu that says, it's chapter 29, which says, and just find it, do you want to rule the world and control it? I don't think it can ever be done. The world is a sacred vessel, and it cannot be controlled. You will only make it worse if you try. It may slip through your fingers and disappear. Some are meant to lead, and others are meant to follow. Some must always train, and others have an easy time. Some are naturally big and strong, and others will always be small. Some will be protected and nurtured, and others will meet with destruction. The master accepts things as they are, and out of compassion avoids extravagance, excess, and the extremes. So you see, this is the idea that you cannot control life. It's totally out of control. So chill out. You see, chill out. Don't worry. It's out of your control. You cannot control it, and you don't want to control it also. I won't get into that right now. Actually, this is also the idea of acceptance, as it's said. Some are naturally strong and some are naturally weak. Some are meant to follow, some are meant to lead. And this is just the way that it is. The acceptance of one's situation. The interesting thing is that we can find here a parallel with Stoicism. The Stoicism, this idea of Wu Wei is actually very similar, it is similar to Stoicism. Stoicism also emphasizes differentiating between what's in your control and what's outside of your control, and focusing only on what's inside of control. And it's also about letting go of control, letting go of trying to control everything, and accepting one's situation, accepting the cards that you've been dealt, and not resisting the change of life. So you see, this is very similar to Wu Wei, which says to surrender control, to let go and go along with the flow of things. And you see, we can also find another example of this Wu Wei in our sense of vision. You see, when trying to see the details of a distant object like a clock, our eyes need to be relaxed, not trying to see it. You see, we don't need to force, we don't need to tense our muscles around our eyes to see something clearly. It will only make it worse. See, our eyes see by themselves. We just got to let them see by themselves and just relax them. Just in the same way, no amount of force, of straining, tensing your muscles around your mouth and the muscles of your tongue will make you feel the taste of the food any better. No amount of tension will make you taste the food better. So you see, both the eyes and the tongue must be allowed to function by themselves. But you see, when we rely so much on our central vision and the central focus of the mind, we can't regain this peripheral vision without first relaxing it. To quote Alan Watts, the psychological and mental equivalent of this way of looking is that particular kind of stupidity to which Lao Tzu and Zhuangzi is so often referred. It is not simply the serenity of the mind, but the perceptuality of the mind. As Zhuangzi said, the perfect man uses his mind as a mirror. He grasps nothing, refuses nothing. He receives but does not keep. One could almost say that it steams its mirror a little to compensate for too strident clarity. And here's another quote from Lao Tzu on the same theme, and I will just put it here up on the screen because you can read it for yourself much faster than me reading it for you. And now you see, it's good to know that in most Taoist writings, there's a certain kind of exaggeration in their writings. And there's this certain kind of humor attached to their writings. It's kind of like they're making fun of themselves. There's a certain kind of self-caricature in their writings. So keep this in mind when I'm reading quotes about Zhuangzi or Lao Tzu. So then Zhuangzi writes on the same theme that the man of character lives at home without using his mind and acts carelessly. Notions of right and wrong, praise and disapproval of others do not bother him. When all around people can enjoy themselves, this is happiness for him. With a sad countenance, he looks like a child who has lost his mother. Looking foolish, he walks like one who has lost his way. He has a lot of money to spend, but he does not know where it comes from. He drinks and eats as much as he needs, not knowing where his food comes from. And again from Lao Tzu, even more straightforward with condemning conventional knowledge, he said, "Throw away wisdom, throw away cleverness, and people will benefit greatly. Cast away humanity, ignore virtue, and people will regain the love of their fellow men. Cast away learning, ignore profit, and there will be no more thieves and robbers. Become natural, love sincerity, reduce self-love, spare your desires." Now here the word natural is an attempt to translate the Chinese word "tu," which refers to the unbleached silk that is used as a base material for painting. And you see, humanity here refers to the central Confucian principle, which ordinarily means hearty, although it is, I'm just going to read this, although it is obvious that Lao Tzu refers to a humanity that is self-aware and perverted by intelligence. Now here's another translation that I'm going to read from this book. It's chapter 19, by the way, which says, "Forget about knowledge and wisdom, and people will be 100 times better off. Throw away charity and righteousness, and people will return to brotherly love. Throw away profit and greed, and there won't be any thieves. These three are superficial and aren't enough to keep us at the center of the circle, so we must also embrace simplicity, put others first, and desire little." So I had to stop the recording yesterday, but now I'm back, and we left off by reading chapter 19 from the Lao Tzu, and as it said, "Forget about knowledge and wisdom, and people will be 100 times better off." Now you see, this doesn't mean to become an imbecile, but it means to put into play this innate and spontaneous intelligence that we have. And I think that it also is referring to the problem with conventional knowledge, which we talked about a lot in the first episode. If you're interested, you can check that out. You know, things like confusing reality with the symbols that we have about reality and all of that, and putting into play this innate intelligence that we have. And also, by the way, I like these 3 last quotes over here. "Embrace simplicity, put others first, desire little." Great quote for life. And also, I'm gonna flex on you with my book. Look at how good it looks. I tell this in every video, but I like this book. It looks pretty good. Also, another very important thing that it's absolutely fundamental, both to Taoist and Confucianist philosophy, that the natural man must be trusted. That man's nature, by itself, you know, its spontaneity, as we said in the first episode, ziran, just by itself, it must be believed, it must be trusted. Now, I leave here some extra reading if you're interested about Alan Watts explaining it, and it goes into us kind of stuff, which I don't really understand, so you can read it if you want to. And by the way, some of these quotes were translated by Deepak because I got the book in Romanian, so it might not be 100% correct. Now, this idea of letting the mind alone is also described by another Taoist writer by the name of Yi-Jing, who is known for floating on air, which refers, of course, to the sensation that occurs during this experience. You see, when T.D. Suzuki was asked how does it feel that he attained Satori, basically saying the same thing as letting the mind alone, but in Zen terms, enlightenment, he answered by saying it is just like any ordinary everyday experience, but about 2 inches above the ground. Now, here's what he wrote about it. I'll put it here up on the screen again because I don't want to read this whole thing for 2 minutes. You can read it faster than me, so you can read it if you want to. And now you see this state is actually not that different from being drunk. You see, as Zhuangzi wrote, and yes, there will be a lot of quotes, Zhuangzi said, "A drunken man who falls from a wagon may suffer but not die. His bones are the same as those of other men, but he faces the accident differently. His spirit is in a state of safety. He is not aware that he is riding in the wagon, nor that he has fallen from it. The idea of life, death, and fear, it cannot penetrate his soul, and thus he does not suffer from contact with objective existence. And if wine can give you that much security, spontaneity will give you even more." Now, of course, this doesn't have to be taken literally. As we said before, these writings have a certain kind of exaggeration and a metaphoric meaning, and it's kind of it has a certain kind of humor in it. And yet again, this spontaneity doesn't mean being completely unconscious or stupid or being in a state of coma. You see, as Alan Watts said, to quote him from the book The Way of Zen, their unconsciousness was not coma, but what later Zen interpreters understood by Wu-Jing, literally translated without mind, which could mean without self-awareness. It is a state of fullness in which the mind functions freely and easily without the sensation of the existence of a second mind or an ego stalking it with a club. If the ordinary man is the one who has to walk by lifting his feet with his hands, the Taoist is the one who has learned to let his feet go by themselves. You see, it's about trusting our nature, trusting that our minds work by themselves. And they don't need any interference, just how our stomach work by themselves. When we get a cut, we don't try to interfere, we let the body do its thing. And just in the same way, it's about trusting that our mind does its thing, and that it works by itself, and it doesn't need, as it said, a second ego, a second mind, looking over it with a club. Now, another important concept in Taoism is the idea of Dai, which means power or virtue. And someone can cultivate this Dai once he has learned Wu Wei to let his mind alone so that it can function by its nature spontaneously. Now, this virtue does not refer to moral virtue, but it has an older meaning as when we say the healing virtues of a plant, its effectiveness. And this Dai is a natural and spontaneous virtue that cannot be cultivated through any deliberate method. It's just like with Wu Wei, you cannot force it, you cannot fake it, you cannot just go at it and get this Dai. It doesn't work like that. To quote Alan Watts from his book, Dai is the unimaginable ingenuity and creative power of man, functioning spontaneously and naturally, a power that is blocked when man tries to master it with formal methods and techniques. As we said, when you try to be funny, you're not funny at all. And to quote Lao Tzu, he said something very interesting about this Dai. To quote him, "The highest virtue is not virtuous, therefore it has virtue. The lowest virtue holds on to virtue, therefore it has no virtue." And if we just substitute Dai into that quote, you see, superior Dai is not Dai, therefore it has Dai. And inferior Dai does not give up Dai, therefore is not Dai. Meaning that superior virtue is not aware of itself as virtue, and therefore it is virtue. But inferior virtue is so conscious of being virtuous, it cannot let go of being virtuous, and therefore it is not virtue. And as we said, it's like trying to be too funny. But you see, even breathing is a great virtue. But mostly we don't consider it as a virtue. Or the fact that you develop these eyes that you have. one of the most beautiful jewels in the whole universe. But you don't consider that something to be proud of, you don't consider it as a great virtue now, don't you? But when you look into someone's eyes, you're looking into one of the most beautiful jewels that the universe has ever produced. Now, I'll put up another quote from Zhuangzi, who wrote this dialogue between Lao Tzu and Confucian. And you see, Confucius preached about the virtue of respecting rules. But the Taoists thought that this was only conventional, it was inauthentic. It's a very interesting conversation. You can read it if you want to. Now you see, the Taoists not only criticize the conventional character of moral virtues, but also of art and work. To quote Zhuangzi, craftsman Chui, or however you spell it, craftsman Chui could draw circles by hand better than with a compass. His fingers seemed to adapt themselves so naturally to what he was working on that he didn't need to be careful. His mental faculties thus remained one that is integrated and suffered no cessation. Not being aware of your own feet indirectly indicates that the footwear is light. Not being aware of the belly suggests that the girdle is light. Intelligence, which does not know positive and negative, suggests that the mind, or Shin, is at rest. And this Shin can't really be translated as mind, because it doesn't really have a word in English. Mind in English is too intellectual, and it cannot be really translated as heart, because heart is too emotional, it's too sentimental. This Shin, or however you spell it, is basically the total sum of all of our psychic or psychological activities. It's something like that. Now, as we said, they cannot be forced. It cannot be pursued by a direct method. You cannot force yourself to be spontaneous. Even though the interesting thing is that you're always being spontaneous. But anyway, the more you try to get it, the more you get away from it. So I think it's about letting go of the outcome, letting go of how it should be, and letting things take their natural course of things, letting things take their natural way, and not resisting and not forcing. You see, when you're drawing a circle, not stopping midway, not blocking midway and doubting yourself, is this actually good? Is it going to work out? But doing it in one continuous line. As it said in the quote, the mind works best when it's not aware of itself. Just in the same way, you know your eyes are working well when you're not seeing your own eyes, when you're not seeing some spots, or you're not hearing your own ears, or you're not feeling your stomach. When you don't feel it, you know that it's working well and that everything is alright. So you see, I guess we could compare this kind of state, we could compare Wu Wei and they to the flow state. You know, when you're completely lost in the task, immersed in the task, and you've lost all sense of your ego. I do think that that's a good comparison, but Wu Wei and they is much more than that. It is Wu Wei, it's also about being aware of the subtlety of the situation and observing all the relevant forces and acting in accordance with those. So it's an interesting topic. But this is one of the main ideas, that that your mind works best when it's not aware of itself. When, as it said, there's not that second ego there looking over you. When you forget about yourself, I mean, you have probably also experienced this. When you enter this flow state, when you're not aware of yourself being aware, and you're flowing with the things. And that's when you unlock that power. You see, it's like when you're completely locked in a video game, and you're not even thinking. You're just doing everything spontaneously, without considering ahead of doing that, without thinking of doing that. You're just doing it, everything, just going with the flow. So just how the craftsman who has cultivated the power of day can work without the use of a compass. The painter, the artist, the cook doesn't need the conventional classification of his art. To quote Lao Tzu, chapter 12, 5 colors blind the eye, 5 notes deafen the ear, 5 flavors make the palate go stale. Too much activity deranges the mind, too much wealth causes crime. Master acts on what she feels and not what she sees. She shuns the latter and prefers to seek the former. Another translation of these last couple of lines That is why the wise man takes care of his stomach and not his eyes. Look at these cool butterflies. So you see, this is not about some kind of asceticism, but that having a fixed idea that there are only 5 true colors, it thwarts, it hinders the eye's sensitivity to color. Because you see, there's an infinite amount of shades, an infinite continuum of shades of colors. And breaking it up into classes distracts us from its subtlety. Coulter and what? That's why the wise man takes care of his stomach and not his eyes. That is, he judges according to the concrete content of the experience and not according to its conformity with purely theoretical standards. And yet again, it's about being tuned in, locked in into this moment and not confusing the as it said, the theoretical standards, the conventional knowledge with reality itself. So then this was Wu Wei. Thank you for being here. If you're interested, I leave the links to some of the YouTube videos that I watched in preparation for this video. And I also took a lot of stuff from Alan Watts's book, Way of Zen. I have it in Romania. So thank you for being here. If you want to watch the other episodes that I made about Taoism, I leave a link to the playlist. I highly recommend you to check it out because we mentioned a lot of stuff here that we talked a lot about in other episodes of the series. And this might be the last episode, so it depends if I find some other things to talk about Taoism, which there are a lot. Hope you enjoyed, hope it was interesting, hope you learned something new. If I said anything stupid, please correct me in the comments. So, thank you for watching this video, thank you for being here. Have a great day and goodbye.